Next up, we have Ludicolo. This jolly third generation Pokemon has been a particular favorite for everyone who has ever played Pokemon Coliseum, where the infamous Mirror Bee wielded several of them on his team and also danced with them. And for those who haven't played those games, we aren't sugarcoating it. Just look at Mirror Bee's team list in both Coliseum and XD. Like, he literally carries 5 of them in his strongest iteration. But aside from those appearances, in present day, Ludicolo actually makes a return to somewhat prominence by being in the upcoming Detective Pikachu movie as presumably a side character, and also for making this face. And for some reason, it's made it to the promotional toy line too. So yeah, there's that. Anyways, today we'll see if Ludicolo was similarly able to bust a move in the competitive scene. So, how good was Ludicolo actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Ludicolo has an interesting niche in OU. It's got 2 tremendous rain-based abilities for both sides of the offensive-defensive spectrum, and thus is never seen without Rain Dance and a Water Stab. On the defensive side, it has Leech Seed to further augment its recovery while draining the opponent, with Toxic assisting even more in that department while hitting the Leech Seed-resistant Celebi, and more permanently crippling something like leftover Salamence that wouldn't mind a Leech or 2 in the long run. Stab Surf, especially in Rain, was the perfect complement to these moves, being effective against Gengar and Steels that are immune to it, as well as smacking Tyranitar that would attempt to set Sandstream up again. Tyranitar's oppressive sand that plagues so much of the advanced metagame meant Ludicolo's Rain Dance was not entirely for its own benefit. Leftovers being usable could mean the difference between a boosted Suicune dying to a second Zapdos Thunderbolt and living to rest and probably sweep. Dugtrio made for a terrific partner to ensure Tyranitar would be out of the way, as well as more easily pick off Blissey that had been crippled by Ludicolo. Ludicolo's quad resistance to water also meant it was an excellent counter to most variants of Suicune, and with defensive investment, it could ward off Metagross nicely as well. However, it was still rather niche. It couldn't handle substitute Suicune at all, it needed defense investment to handle Metagross and thus was slow, and as a result, it could be overwhelmed by Banded Meteor Mash quite quickly in conjunction with Sand. Finally, it was constantly at war with Tyranitar and its Sand, and Tyranitar was both strong and bulky enough to be able to mess with Ludicolo easily, albeit not usually winning a 1v1, but it didn't have to. Dugtrio could only do so much. Thus, unless one was really truly going all out on the sand removing strategy, most players would generally go with Celebi, whose better defenses and speed in conjunction with recover meant it generally handles Suicune and Metagross while also being able to stave off Curse Lax and not minding status thanks to Natural Cure. On the more offensive side, Ludicolo was significantly less niche and in fact quite a threat. Kingdra was the definitive Swift Swim sweeper that set up late game and ripped even a slightly weakened offense apart, but Ludicolo had its own advantages, most notably Stab on its Hidden Power Grass, which gave it the ability to hit Suicune really hard, especially with Miracle Seed, which is something Kingdra would love to be able to do. Not being weak to Mixed Salamence's Dragon Claw and resisting various Earthquakes was also potentially game-breaking. As for issues, Blissey and Celebi were chief among them, though Dugtrio alongside bait like Explosion Gengar went a long way, as well as removing Tyranitar and its Sand to make sure the sweep was not disrupted. Also, Ludicolo's lower special attack than Kingdra meant that bulky Pokemon like Jirachi, Zapdos, and Metagross were likelier to be out of KO range, which was often curtains for a sweep, and as a result, the game, since Ludicolo was very much an all-or-nothing Pokemon. However, on dedicated rain teams, it formed a vicious 1-2 punch with Kingdra. Overall, it wasn't a top OU threat, but any dedicated advanced player knows and respects what Ludicolo is capable of. Generation 4 saw Ludicolo shed its defensive role and be seen exclusively as part of dedicated rain teams, unlike Kingdra, which was a better overall Pokemon now that it didn't need rain to succeed. With Life Orb and better Grass Stab, it was now a powerhouse and was right behind Kingdra on those teams that everyone feared unless they were one of the few players running Abomasnow. However, Ludicolo's meager speed meant that modest variants were still outrun by Choice Scarf Flygon and Jirachi in Rain, and going Timid was not an option since the lack of power would be too severe, especially since rock types now got a special defense boost in Sand, and Tyranitar was ubiquitous. Dugtrio was less viable now too, and that made both Tyranitar and Blissey a pain. Prominent Priority was also a pain, and Ludicolo was not very good at standing up to Scissor's Bullet Punch, Lucario's Extreme Speeds, and Infernape's Mach Punches. Although Rain was niche, a smart player could abuse it and potentially run over the opponent easily. Ludicolo was a big reason why. However, Rain was actually quite prominent in the tier below, where Kingdra wasn't, and and thus Ludicolo reigned, pun not intended. UU Rain was actually so powerful and hard to stop with the lack of other weather interfering, which made Damp Rock completely viable on lead Yuxi, and thus the de facto method of dealing with rain, which was switching around resistances until it runs out, was not reliable at all. It was so monstrous that some players wanted Damp Rock banned from UU. Ludicolo could even surprise Chansey by running Swords Dance and thus running right through it. Overall, Ludicolo was the face of UU Rain, and it was completely excellent. Ludicolo even had an excellent niche in Ubers. Anything that can deal with Kyogre's mighty water spouts is at least considered, and turns out Ludicolo is excellent beyond that. With a specially defensive Rain Dish set, it can sit on most of the specially offensive Ubers metagame with its incredible healing with Substitute, Leech Seed, and Protect, meaning it was incredibly hard to take out if you weren't hitting it for nearly all of its health. Leech Seed of course also meant Groudon was not changing the weather unscathed, and it often couldn't hit Ludicolo particularly hard either. Besides King Kyogre, it was able to stave off monsters like most variants of the Lati twins, Manaphy, Palkia, Dialga, Giratina Origin Form, Mewtwo, and Darkrai. It of course wasn't an impenetrable wall, and all the mentioned Pokemon had tools that could potentially take Ludicolo out, but if it came in on Kyogre's water spout and got that substitute up against an offensive team, they were in for a world of hurt. In Gen 4 VGC, the earliest days of VGC, Ludicolo actually fit well in there because it had access to both Fake Out and Swift Swim for rain teams, in addition to its quad water resistance and stab spread surf. Now again, as I always say, there isn't that much information that is cataloged on this era of VGC, but it seemed to have dominated Pokemon that were pretty common, like Metagross, which is pretty great. In fact, it was even on the 1st, 3rd, and 4th place teams in Worlds 2009, with Kazuyuki Tsuji, Steven Wazerluz, and Grace Beck respectively. And then in VGC 2010, the year with restricted mons, Kyogre was allowed, and thus Ludicolo was even more excellent, using Rain to outspeed a lot of things and Grass Knot to pound Groudon, which were both excellent qualities. In fact, its utility was so excellent that it was once again on top teams at Worlds, piloted by Ray Rizzo, Yasuki Tochigi, and Isao Yoshioka, respectively. Now again, not much is documented on Gen 4 VGC, but it's reasonable to surmise that Ludicolo was pretty prominent in the metagame. In the weather generation of OU, Ludicolo started off absolutely on fire, with Politoed making things a million times easier than manually setting up rain. Despite Ferrothorn, it was a tremendous threat, especially when paired with Specs Kingdra. In fact, this strategy was so potent that Drizzle and Swift Swim were quickly banned from being used on the same team as each other, and unfortunately as a result, Ludicolo completely disappeared for the rest of the generation. That's potency for ya. It fell to never used, where it could be both a terrific standalone rain sweeper or a solid wall, dealing with threats like Gorobis and opposing Ludicolo, and abusing some nice new defensive tools in Scald and a buffed Giga Drain, in addition to being able to freely use Synthesis. Both variants were quite fearsome, but the sweeper was its flagship, and many teams quivered in the face of a Ludicolo against a Choice Specs Charizard locked into Fire Blast, knowing it rain damps and be likely to outright sweep them. In Gen 5 VGC, for VGC 2012, Politoed ran wild, and as such, Ludicolo was excellent. It of course had to deal with all sorts of other weather, but it more than managed, and this was reflected in its usage, because it actually has quite a bit of it. With Absorb Bulb, it could turn its water resistance into a boost, thus providing offense while it played defense and letting it blow through common bulky Pokemon like Zapdos and Metagross. It worked well alongside Toxicroak, so that Tyranitar was threatened from all angles, and Abomasnow wasn't scot-free either. Toxicroak also appreciated Ludicolo, hitting it with Surf thanks to Dry Skin. It could even go the Subseat route, though this was less common due to the lack of Fake Out. 2012 also isn't the most well documented for tournaments on the internet. As for notable placements, with Ludicolo, Randy Quayle reached top 8 at the Toronto Nationals, and Matthew Coyle impressively managed to reach 6 at Worlds with it in the seniors division as well. But the big story here though is Toller Webb's first place finish with Ludicolo in the seniors division at Worlds. He used the complete antithesis of Ludicolo's traditional moves, because instead of having Rain Dance, it had Sunny Day. With Swift Swim, it would outrun rain teams and then remove their weather, which also boosted his Hydreigon and Rotom Heat's fire attacks. Both were key, but the former was definitely the selling point. Such creativity leading to the high success even led to this Ludicolo being distributed as a mystery gift at VGC regionals that came after 2012. So yeah, Toller Webb's Ludicolo basically got the same treatment as Mean's Mamoswine after Worlds 2013. And speaking of 2013, Ludicolo mostly played the same, and as such for placements, Dewey Da reached 4th at the San Jose Regionals using Toller's EV spread but opting for a sub-seed variant and notably winning games off 1 HP thanks to the consistent recovery. Gavin Michaels won the US Nationals with it using a more traditional fake-out set, opting for Citrus Berry as the item. Grace A reached 5th with it in the Seniors Division at the same Nationals. Kane Matthews reached 15th with it at the Australian Nationals. Juan S reached top 16 with it at the European Nationals in Birmingham. Ben Hickey reached 2nd with it at Worlds in the Senior Division, and Gavin Michaels reached 22nd at Worlds with it in the Masters Division. Overall, Ludicolo was an excellent Pokemon in the 5th generation VGC. Ludicolo stood no chance in the higher tiers and even lost its shine in Ubers thanks to Drizzle no longer being permanent, as well as the Primals changing the landscape completely in ORAS. It unfortunately found itself in NU once again. However, there it was again a terrific rain dance sweeper, blowing through many common offensive teams who were mostly comprised of glass cannons that were nothing but victims for Ludicolo in the rain. Kabutops paired with it on dedicated rain teams for watery destruction, since having other setters made it easier for the Swift Swimmers to deal damage immediately upon getting in rather than having to set up first, which could be absurd. However, it wasn't all glory for Ludicolo, as Mantine, Ferroseed, and Abomasnow completely stuffed it. And Abomasnow of course interfered with rain. Ludicolo also had an infuriating tendency to come up just short against other grasses like Vileplume and Roselia. Getting outsped by Choice Scarf Scyther and Tauros was no fun either, and Kangaskhan's fake out was a major thorn in its side. However, in spite of these issues, Ludicolo was an excellent Gen 6 NU Pokemon that every good player had to account for. Now on to Gen 6 VGC. Ludicolo was a terrifying Life Orb sweeper on rain teams in 2014, and despite the myriad of issues it faced as Mega Venusaur's Thick Fat, Mega Kangaskhar's Fake Out, Mega Charizard Wise Drought, and Talonflame's Gale Wings Brave Bird, it posed a massive threat in the same way it always had, especially against weakened teams late game, and destroying Salamence, Garchomp, and Azumarill was especially fantastic. It also had a brand new set in the form of Assault Vest, which added a ton of defensive utility and gave its game a lot more depth, especially since it was able to viably run Fake Out, with the Vest's special defense boost being such that even without investment, it was able to survive 2 full power Salamence Draco Meteors. It could afford to run a Bold Nature and pump its defense investments, even being able to live a Mega Mawile Play Rough and 2 Garchomp Dragon Claws. It could even heal itself despite the Assault Vest thanks to Giga Drain, as well as being able to opt for Rain Dish. Scald let it mess with these physical attackers even more, and with all of this, it's easy to see why, in addition to people wanting to experiment with rain teams, that Ludicolo actually has a lot of placings, so we've restricted them to top 3s only here, for the sake of time. And I apologize if I butcher any of your names for Gen 6 and Gen 7. Eno Shakar reached 2nd at the Virginia Regionals, Luke C reached 3rd at the Adelaide Regionals, people simply documented as Matt and Kyle reached 1st and 2nd respectively at the Brisbane Regionals in the Seniors Division, Zach Thornburg reached 2nd at the US Nationals in Seniors, Alex Ogosla won the US Nationals in Masters with Ludicolo on his team, and Arbodeku won the UK Nationals. And then at Worlds, Haruka Narita reached 3rd in the Junior Division. In the Seniors Division of Worlds, Ian McLaughlin reached 4th, and in the Masters Division, Lee Provost reached 7th. And as for stats in the Masters Division alone, there were Ludicolos on a total of 12 teams, giving it a 20% usage rate. And then Aaron Zhang, aka Cybertron, and Wolf Glick also used it to reach 1st and 2nd at the Philadelphia Regionals that followed Worlds, which still used 2014 rules. In 2015, Ludicolo's Assault Vest shifted to be more offensive, with the vast majority now running a modest nature. And with that, even in 2015, Ludicolo still had a lot of placements. So for the sake of time, we've restricted it to 1st place finishes only, where Nicholas Borgi reached 1st at the Holmes Premier Challenge, Cedric Bernier won the Houston Nationals, Joaquin Campuzano reached 2nd and 1st at Mexico's 2 regionals, Aiden McKinney reached 1st in juniors, but at Worlds, however, there seemed to be a significant fall off for Ludicolo, with the only ones placing being Alejandro Gomez at 33rd. Ludicolo was significantly less popular in 2016, since Primal Groudon and Xerneas were quite above the power level it was used to. Nevertheless, it still had some utility and saw some placements, which are as follows. Brendan reached 3rd at the South Africa Nationals, Brandon Myers reached 2nd at the Oregon Nationals, Ben Grover reached 4th at the Glasgow Regionals, Javier Espejo reached 6th at the Chile Regionals, Charlie Pastrana reached 4th at the Mexico Nationals, and Ludicolo even managed to snag a Worlds appearance, coming in at 59th on Hongyu Zhu's team. So overall, for most of the 6th generation, excluding Worlds, Ludicolo was an absolute force. Unfortunately, Ludicolo was so outmatched that it now dropped to the lowest of the low in PU. But at least there, it was a solid rain dance sweeper. Surprise, surprise. Although of course it came with its trademark issues of being weak to priority, being outpaced by fast Scarfers, and sometimes just not having enough power. It couldn't even use a Z Crystal effectively because its other moves being weakened was just too troublesome to overcome. In a matter of speaking, one door would open and several others would close. But overall, Ludicolo exists decently in PU. And as for Gen 7 VGC, in 2018, Ludicolo's old Assault Vest set made a return, but it could also effectively bear Waterium Z for a potentially game-breaking Hydro Vortex. It also greatly enjoyed the massive upgrade Pelipper was over Politoed in terms of Drizzle, although some players still use Toad for its support moves like Helping Hand, Perish Song, and Icy Wind, in addition to solid special defense. But otherwise, Ludicolo functioned the same as before, just with different surroundings. It definitely enjoyed Incineroar's ubiquity, especially if Ludicolo was paired with Tapu Lele, as it so often was to stuff Fake Out. Its usage was actually through the roof, with how well it performed against the meta, as well as how solid rain teams were, with their seemingly endless bevy of amazing options. So again, we've limited its placements to top 3, or we'd be here forever. Alistair Sandover reached 3rd at the Singapore Regionals, 2nd at the Malaysia Special Event, and 3rd at the Auckland Open. Paul Ruiz reached 1st at the first Ecuador Special Event, Felipe Mendez reached 1st at the Chile Special Event, Irina Urina reached 3rd at the Russian Nationals, Young King Sun reached 2nd at the Virginia Regionals, Christopher Egan reached 3rd at the Melbourne Regionals, Benjamin Tan reached 1st at the Malaysian Regionals, and Carson Confer reached 1st at the Latin American Internationals, as well as a 13th place at Worlds. In 2019, the Sun and Moon series saw Groudon and Kyogre unleashed in their base forms, and thus weather abuse reigned. True to form, whenever there's weather wars, you can bet Ludicolo probably shows up in some form. And in this case, Ludicolo combined its new toy Assault Vest in the Z Move Less Sun series with its old Grass Knot antics to become a top Pokemon in the metagame, being able to abuse the rain better than nearly anything, and being able to handle both weather setters quite well. Its ability to handle rain was also appreciated on certain Groudon teams, especially those with Xerneas, that defined the metagame but needed backup against Kyogre's assault. Ludicolo also prominently used Icy Wind for speed control to help its trainer gain any advantage possible over the monstrous competition. And then in the Moon series, when Z moves were unleashed, so was Ludicolo's mighty Hydro Vortex once again, being such a huge component of the meta, both going with the tide and against it, and being a game in, game out performer. Its usage was absolutely astronomical, and as such, to save time, we've limited its placements for today to top 3 in the Sun series and top 1 in the Moon series. For the Sun series, Andrew Burley reached 2nd with it at the Philadelphia Regionals, Terry Hong reached 3rd with it in Portland, and Ronald Seitz reached 3rd at the Tampines Regionals in Singapore. In the Moon series, there was Alberto Rios at the Panama Special Event, Guido Michelli at the Buenos Aires Special Event, and Pablo Godoy at the La Libertas Special Event, Forrest Aurelian at the Cannes Special Event, Megan Rattle at the Perth Regionals, and Alexander Williams at the Greensboro Regionals. And in the upcoming Ultra Series, is its usage likely to drop because of the primals? Who knows, we'll just have to wait and see. Ludicolo's persevered before. And that's it. So how good was Ludicolo actually? Well, its OU usage was never more than fringe and fell off pretty drastically. It was a DPP UU staple, but struggled to find its footing as it plummeted in the generations following. However, surprisingly, it's actually been one of the most consistent VGC Pokemon of all time. And I say surprisingly because I did not expect this video to be this long for Ludicolo, for VGC of all things. But as the history shows, it's pretty much been the face of rain abuse for a decade plus. Overall, wherever best applicable, this merry Pokemon has made its trainers jubilant. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And as for the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Ludicolo? How would you improve it, at least in singles? Do you think it should do things other than be useful in rain? Or I don't know, whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And as always, shout outs to the patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.